Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're here. Huge thanks for taking the time out of your day during this very busy season to join us. I'm Sherry Yano, and I'm grateful to be calling in from the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I'm the Director of Grants and Community Engagement at the Real Estate Foundation of BC. If you're willing, we would love it if you would introduce yourself in the chat and share your name, maybe where you're located, what organization you're affiliated with, and anything else you want to share, just so that we all know who's in the room. I think right now there's 95 of us. Some quick housekeeping. If you registered for this webinar, you will receive a copy of the recording and the slides. If you have questions at any time during the next 60 to 90 minutes, we would be very grateful if you put them in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, not in the chat, but in that Q&A box. That would be super helpful. So we'll take a look at all the questions after the slide presentation and answer as many as we can. And I'm going to hand it over to the team for some quick intros. So over to you, Tara.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Keitler. I'm a grants program manager here, and I'm calling in from the Snuneymuxw territory on Vancouver Island. And I'll pass it to Jen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen McCaffrey, Senior Grants Program Manager, calling in from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and I'll pass it to Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan Ray. I'm the Grant Systems Manager here at REFBC, and I'm also calling in from the unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and I'll pass it to Hetty.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hetty Rubin. I'm a Grants Program Manager, and I'm calling in from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I'll pass it over to Josie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josie Ayesi. I am the Grants Operations Manager, and I'm calling in from our office today on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and I'll pass it back to Sherry.
Thanks. Yeah, there's 103 of you here. So thank you so much for joining us and for putting introducing yourself in the chat. I see someone's calling in from Sicily, so yay you. I don't know what time it is over there. So I am just going to pass it over to Hetty to tell us a bit about what we're going to be covering today.
Thanks, Sherry. So we thought we would take some time to share with you who we are as the Real Estate Foundation of BC, what we fund, a little bit about our application process, some tips for applying, and then open it up for Q&A. And then I'll pass it back to you, Sherry.
Thanks. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about us. Next slide, please. So we are a philanthropic organization, which just means we give out money to advance sustainable, equitable, and socially just land use and real estate practices across BC. So when it comes to general grants, we're really all about land use projects. So projects aimed at bringing about healthy and just relationships between people and the land. So for more information, you can check out our website at refbc.ca. Next slide, please. Okay, so our money story. We get asked a lot about our money story, so where the money we use for grant making comes from. So the vast majority of our revenue is derived from the sale of residential real estate. So if you put down a deposit on the purchase of a residential property in BC, it goes into a pooled brokerage trust account at a bank or a credit union, and it earns just a little bit of interest. And these financial institutions are required to send this interest to REFBC to give it out for good work. So this means that our revenue is derived from the sale of unceded territories, and that has helped inform some of the things that we've committed to. Slide, please. Thanks, Jessie. So one of the documents that provides a lot of details on these commitments is our TAWA report. So TAWA stands for Transformative Actions for UNDRIP Advancement. So Tara Marsden, who's in the slide pictured on the right, she's our UNDRIP fellow, And Mark Gifford, our CEO, created the UNDRIP Fellowship in 2022. And lucky for us, Tara has been working with us along with First Nations advisors to identify concrete ways that our organization can uphold and advance the 46 articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That's through our work, through our operations and governance, including our grant making programs. So we're on this learning journey to be better able to uphold UNDRIP. And if you apply for a grant, and if, like us, you're a settler organization, you'll notice that we ask you to share your journey about how you're upholding First Nations rights, titles, sovereignty, and UNDRIP in your project work as well. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so grant making commitments. So these are in light of where our money comes from. We've made a couple of commitments in terms of our grant making program. So we've committed to move more funds to Indigenous nations and organizations for land-based priorities, like projects that they identify as priorities. So over the past 3 years, we've gone from seeing under 5% of our funding flow to Indigenous nations and organizations to over 2/3, so about 70% this year. We've also committed to sharing more decision-making power over grant making with Indigenous community representatives. And over the past 3 years have moved from 0% of our grant making dollars having First Nations oversight to 95% of our grant making dollars having some Indigenous community oversight. And I will stop here and turn it over to Tara to talk about the type of work that we support.
Thanks, Sherry. I'm going to talk a little bit about what kinds of activities we fund, as well as our funding priority framework. So we have 5 general activity areas that we are able to fund. This includes law and policy reform, applied research, community engagement, professional and public education, and there is often overlap within these areas. Law and policy reform often looks like regulation changes or governance and strategic planning work, or projects related to advancing Indigenous governance and rights and title to land. Applied research refers to research that answers specific community-driven questions or addresses a community-identified problem or gap and contributes to practical solutions being implemented on the ground by the communities closest to the issues. And then professional education and public education often includes activities such as training, storytelling, course development, or community engagement focused on increasing knowledge of land use and watershed practices, Indigenous rights, and climate issues. And we're particularly interested in projects that are community-led and support Indigenous rights, and projects that advance justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion for racialized and other communities systemically excluded from land use decision-making. Next slide, please. I'll just go into a bit of detail about our funding priorities, and I do encourage you to look at our website under refbc.ca/priorities, and you can download our guide, our funding priorities framework guide, that will go into more detail. But we have 5 main priority areas, and again, these are very broad categories, and we support a wide range of projects within these, and often there are overlapping priorities. So they are land use, freshwater, built environment, food sovereignty, and real estate profession. And I'll go into a bit of detail over these in the next few slides. For our land use priority, the focus of this area is on strengthening relationships between people and the land to promote resilient communities and natural environments. Projects that we support in this area have focused on upholding Indigenous territorial governance, laws, and decision-making practices, land-based projects that center Indigenous knowledge, worldviews, language, and culture, and contribute to exercise the rights and titles to land. We also see projects that are focused on land use planning and practice that value Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and free, prior, and informed consent. Another example is developing conservation finance opportunities, such as Indigenous protected conservation areas, and we often see projects focused on youth mentoring programs that are supporting land-based activities and learning. Under freshwater, we support projects that that are working towards healthy freshwater ecosystems such as rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Some types of examples of projects that we fund in this category are supporting strong policies and planning for freshwater protection and community-driven watershed governance, Indigenous-led and community-based water stewardship activities, and community-based water quality monitoring projects, drought preparation, and flooding resiliency projects. In the built environment, this refers to any projects related to the physical infrastructure of communities, such as safe, accessible housing stock, energy systems, parks, roads and trails, and public transit. Some examples of the types of projects that we see in this area include Indigenous-led or UNDRIP-focused OCP and community land use planning and policy reviews, and development of built environments that advance climate solutions, such as energy efficient retrofits and design. We've also seen projects come forward surrounding community land trusts and other innovative models on housing developments or community spaces that meet community needs related to access, affordability, and cultural safety. And we also see place-based planning and inclusive community-informed programs shaping their environments. And for food sovereignty, these are projects that are working towards ensuring land is protected to support thriving local sustainable food systems, and that food sovereignty is enhanced for communities that have been denied control over their food systems through colonization. So some examples of what these types of projects look like that we're able to support are projects focused on centering Indigenous knowledge, stewardship, and ceremony of land-based food systems, increasing options for land access and tenure related to Indigenous food systems, and Indigenous-led and community-based food system initiatives, such as food hubs or food infrastructure projects. We also see youth training programs offering land-based learning and reconnection opportunities. And lastly, our real estate profession priority. And this one, we actually have a separate granting stream, so we're not covering it in this webinar so much. It's really geared towards the real estate industry and profession, but we do have a grant stream and focus on strengthening the real estate industry to advance sustainable and equitable land use and real estate practices. And if you're interested to learn more about specific projects that we're able to support in recent years, please visit our website, refbc.ca/projects, and you're able to search for different priorities and see a description of the different kinds of projects that we've been able to support in the last few years. And just to note that we do receive more applications than we have the budget to fund, unfortunately. Recently, we've seen a 5-to-1 ratio of the amount of requested funding to the amount of funding that we have available. And it's about 25% of eligible applications that are able to be approved. And with that, I will turn it over to Jen to speak about the application process.
Great, thanks, Tara. So I'll walk you through REFBC's grant application process. In this slide, you'll see the process from the initial inquiry to the potential funding decision. Grant inquiries are ongoing throughout the year. In the 2 months lead up to our intake, we typically field upward of 200 inquiry meetings. This year, we're offering webinars to help deal with that tremendous interest, and we're grateful to all of you for joining us in this way today. REFBC has a two-stage process. At stage 1, it's a fairly short application. It's somewhat like an extended letter of intent, where you'll provide an outline of your project and explain at a high level how your project meets REFBC's assessment criteria. I'm going to be going through that assessment criteria in the next slide. At stage 1, project readiness is ideal. It's not essential if you can give us a general sense of what the project is, who's involved, or what you aim to accomplish. And note here in bold, the intake this year opens January 6th, 2025, and our deadline is January 28th. When the intake process closes, all applications are then reviewed by a staff committee, and we engage with our UNDRIP fellow and other key Indigenous partners on how projects address our UNDRIP criteria. As Tara mentioned, in recent years, we are seeing high demand. Of course, this is making our application process more competitive. And so again, it's projects that most strongly connect to REFBC's funding priorities that Tara just went over, as well as the assessment criteria that are most likely to be shortlisted. And, you know, we are fortunate to see through the application process incredible work happening around the province. But given the high number of applications we're receiving, just to note, even strong projects are not assured of being shortlisted. And I say that not as a way to discourage you, but just to understand the context we now find ourselves in. Shortlisted stage 1 applications are then invited to complete a longer stage 2 application. This is your chance to share more details about your project and provide a full project budget, project deliverables, and details on how your project aims to advance UNDRIP. And you will have 3 or 4 weeks to complete that stage 2 application. A grants program manager is assigned to review your stage 2. They'll prepare a staff report to our board to support their adjudication. And when we're doing that staff review, sometimes, but not all times, we might reach out to you for some clarifying questions. Stage 2 applications are considered at either a June board meeting or a September board meeting. The timing is determined of when your stage 2 is reviewed by our board. That's determined depending on what project start date you provide in your application, as well as we have to consider our board agenda capacity at each meeting and do some balancing there. Grants of 50,000 or less are adjudicated by our CEO, and grants over 50,000 are decided by the Board of Governors. Next slide, Josie. So let's look at our project assessment criteria. We've got 5 here. Starting with project need. In stage 1, it's helpful if you can briefly explain the need for the work. If you're working with a community or if you're part of a community that's impacted by a land use issue, it's helpful to explain if that community has indicated that your project is needed and it's a desired solution. That's great for us to understand. Part of the need might also be around timeliness, that there may be a seasonal aspect to your project. Perhaps your work is related to policy reform, if a policy window is coming open. So mention any timeliness factors we should understand. And then moving to UNDRIP, you've heard from Sherry about our focus on advancing UNDRIP. REFBC, with guidance from our UNDRIP fellows, interested in how projects can help advance the inherent rights of Indigenous people as articulated in UNDRIP. So in your application, we ask if and how you intend your project to benefit the nations on whose territory your project's taking place, and how your project might help them advance UNDRIP. Another organization we're learning from is the Circle on Philanthropy. They support funders to flow more resources to Indigenous communities. We're using their I4DM matrix. This is their Indigenous definitional matrix tool. It helps organizations reflect on their relationship with Indigenous communities. So when you go into your stage 1 application, we provide a link to the I4DM, and we ask you to self-select where you think your organization best fits. It's quite simple. It's just a 1-page chart. It shouldn't take you too much time to understand it. And then your classification that you choose should reflect the current state of your organization rather than where your organization is aspiring to go. And now shifting to our focus on relationship building assessment. A community need or challenge is often best solved when people who are most affected get to be part of developing and implementing solutions. And that's what we're interested in understanding fundamentally about relationships. We want to understand who the project's for and how they're involved. And to have the best chance of success, a project will benefit from having people and organizations involved who can implement the changes you want to achieve. That might be other nonprofits or community members, could be local government, other levels of government, there may be other stakeholders. It's helpful for you to just briefly name the key stakeholders. And we'd like to understand how the communities you're seeking to serve will benefit from the relationships your project will build. This is one indication of organization accountability to communities that you aim to serve. REFBC we're doing this work too. We're reflecting on how we can best hold ourselves accountable to community. And so we appreciate understanding how you're doing this work and sharing that a bit in your application. And looking at leadership and innovation, we're interested to know if you're attempting a new approach to a difficult problem, or perhaps there's a component of that is new or innovative to work you're already doing. And of course, we recognize that innovation is not something that's easy to continuously be creating. And so that's why we couple it with leadership, which is a key ingredient in any successful initiative. We're looking to understand how your organization is demonstrating leadership and addressing a land use challenge, or perhaps the project will develop future leadership capacity. And we're also interested in your organization's history of working with Indigenous rights holders. And if you have researched the history and culture of the nation where you're carrying your project out on. Leadership and innovation can be demonstrated through your collaboration with impacted communities and through efforts to balance and integrate Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing with Western science and ways of knowing. And finally, our fifth assessment criteria is about legacy. What will be the longer term impacts of your project? What will your project contribute towards sustainable and equitable land use policy or governance, practice, or management? As grant funding is meant to provide broad community benefit, we're looking to understand if project outcomes can be shared broadly for others to learn from. Perhaps you're piloting a solution that others may consider adopting. Again, the project assessment criteria and the funding priorities Tara provided are in our funding priorities guide, and that's the front cover image there on this slide. So this is a great resource document to refer to when you're preparing your application. It's just 4 pages long. I encourage you to use that as a resource. And I will pass it to Hetty.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to share some hopefully practical tips for when you're working through the application and thinking through the project proposal. What kinds of expenses can the foundation support? So we can cover project costs related to staffing and program delivery, project coordination, communications. That can include videography and social media and other types of communications, consultant fees, workshops and training, travel, convening, meeting expenses, ceremony, cultural protocols, honoraria, and building cultural competencies. And typically, we do not fund capital or infrastructure costs, such as purchasing land or buildings, activities that primarily provide financial benefit for individuals, partisan political activities, debt retirement, endowments, reserves, mortgage paydowns, or retroactive funding. Next slide, please. How much money do we typically provide in our grants? And I saw that was a question in the Q&A, and it comes up a lot. So, they range. We don't have a fixed number, but small grassroots projects typically range in grant size from about 5,000 to 50,000. Larger or provincial-wide projects, they tend to range from about 50,000 to over 100. And complex multi-year programs and initiatives, they tend to range from about 100,000 to about 300,000. So our grants are intended to support time-bound projects or initiatives with specific objectives, activities, and deliverables identified. And there, as I mentioned, is no fixed amount of funding provided. It really varies depending on the type of work, the type of project, the location or locations, the number of partners and funders involved, and the scope of the project. And so we wanted to provide a few tips on the budget aspect. And at the stage 1 application phase, you're only asked to provide a high-level narrative budget. In our efforts to make the stage 1 application less onerous, we don't ask for a super detailed budget. However, if your application is shortlisted to stage 2, you will be asked to provide a more detailed budget with revenues and expenses. So some tips that we think would be helpful would be to ensure you're providing a budget for the whole of the project, not just the aspects you're asking REFBC to support. So for example, if you're requesting $50,000 from REFBC to support the development of a training manual for a training program for a food sovereignty initiative, it's good to share information, and it's good for us to see a full project budget that also includes the other aspects that REFBC isn't being asked to fund. So that could include any number of things such as travel, ceremony, honoraria, research, etc. And we do consider multi-year funding. Grants typically range from 1 to 3 years, but this can vary. Some are shorter, some are longer. And when you are providing a more detailed budget at a stage 2, expenses and revenues should balance. If your expenses total $150,000 in your budget, your revenues should also total $150,000. And matching funding is not required. However, other funding contributions, even if they're not confirmed at the time of the application, can help strengthen a proposal, but it's not required. And most importantly, your budget should reflect your project. It should tell the same story. If part of what you're asking REFBC to fund, for example, is to cover honoraria for First Nations or other First Nations participation, the budget should reflect this. And with that, I'll pass it over to Megan.
Thanks. So our online application form, as well as a Word template, can be found at our website at that link there, refbc.ca/grants. There is a way when you're filling out the web form to save it and come back to it later, but we do recommend filling out the Word document template and copy pasting your content to the web form until you're ready to submit the application. We just find that streamlines it for a lot of our applicants. If possible, it's always best to try and submit your application early, just in case you have any questions or issues that come up. There are some troubleshooting tips at the beginning of the application, but if you run into any issues, just reach out to us at grants@refbc.ca. We're happy to help out. And I'll pass it back to Sherry.
Thanks, Megan. So thanks so much to all of you for joining. We'll stay on Zoom for as long as it takes to answer questions. And again, please put your questions in the Q&A box below and not in the chat. Also, again, everyone who registered will get a copy of the presentation. And if you don't have questions, you're totally free to go. If you do have questions in future, as Megan said, please feel free to email grants@refbc.ca and also please use the QR code on this slide if you want to sign up for our newsletter and get notified about upcoming grant intakes, deadlines to apply, and invitations to online and in-person events like this one. We really, really appreciate all of your interest and the time and labor that you might put into an application for a general grant. As funders, we know that we are always very lucky to get to support good work.